In the fires of war against the Soviet Union, Osama bin Laden co-founded a new organization called Al-Qaeda, or the Base in Arabic. With this organization, bin Laden hoped to use his skills as an organizer, fundraiser, and trainer of insurgents to mount a holy struggle around the world, where he saw his religion losing ground. He was like the terrorist checklist and logistics expert. He would not rest until he could restructure the world to fit his extremely narrow concept of Islam. I think we all have an idea of what bin Laden and Al-Qaeda are famous for, but this attack in 2001 came after over a decade of escalation around the world. From Nairobi to Los Angeles to Kandahar, Al-Qaeda carried out guerrilla war throughout the 1990s. This is the story we're going to talk about today. In 1989, the Soviet Union, embattled by surprisingly well-armed Mujahideen troops, abandoned its attempt to give military aid to the government of Afghanistan. By 1992, the communist Afghan government had collapsed, and what followed was years of chaos and violence. Those Mujahideen insurgents were now fighting over who would be the new rulers of Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden declared this a resounding success and returned to Saudi Arabia in 1989, hailed as a conquering hero. His new pet project of funding and training radical Salafi guerrillas in conflicts around the globe wouldn't have to wait long before he had a new place to put them. In August of 1990, the secular Iraqi army, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded into the wealthy Gulf state of Kuwait, a baby's breath from the Saudi Arabian border. The Saudis were worried as their army did not have enough troops to combat the Iraqis. Bin Laden thought this would be a job for Al-Qaeda! He pitched the idea of raising an army of Mujahideen fighters to fight the Iraqis to King Fahd. However, Fahd rejected his offer in favor of allowing the United States and their allies to deploy in Saudi Arabia instead. Bin Laden was pissed. Not only had he been rebuffed, but now American Christian troops were deploying close to some of the holiest sites in all of Islam. He was rejected so hard, if it happened today, he'd buy a fedora and start a cartoon animal YouTube channel. He went public about his anger, calling out the Saudi Arabian government for desecrating holy soil, as well as supporting the Oslo peace process in Israel. BT dubs, I talk about the Oslo peace process in a video I made here. The Saudis labeled him as a radical threat and banished him from the country. They froze his assets and cut off his stipend of $7 million a year. Bin Laden took his toys and moved next door to crash on his friend's couch in Sudan. However, it's pretty well known he kept in contact and got support from a few members of the royal family, as well as some of his own relatives. This was a turning point for him. Once the Saudis had rejected him and the Americans committed such a heinous act in his eyes, he changed his tactics. Now, the enemy of Islam was the United States, and anyone who collaborated with them. He also expanded the scope of their operations to not just defending Islam in war zones, but around the globe. Soon, Al-Qaeda was taking over Salafi groups and uniting them under one global cause. They were going on the offensive. Al-Qaeda went from guerrilla fighter organization to terrorist group, and their debut on the scene would occur in 1992. On December 29th, a bomb went off in the Goldmoor Hotel in Aden, Yemen. A group of US Marines were stationed there heading to Somalia. The troops had already left by the time the bomb went off. Either way, this was the first Al-Qaeda attack targeting the United States. Al-Qaeda and bin Laden were based out of Sudan from 1992 to 1996. They were part of the government after a coup resulted in a radical Islamist government there. Bin Laden set up some businesses and trained insurgents. He was a literal terrorist job creator. In the meantime, Al-Qaeda supported terrorist attacks all over the place. Several bombings and assassinations, or attempts at them, occurred in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Philippines. The ambitions of bin Laden and Al-Qaeda escalated over the decade. In 1998, they bombed 2 US embassies in East Africa. 2 truck bombs went off in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. The explosions killed over 200 people. This was the first Al-Qaeda attack to get significant mainstream media attention back in the US. Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri's faces were on the news, and Al-Qaeda became a word on Americans' tongues. This was when the FBI placed them on their top 10 most wanted list. Does anyone else remember how around the year 2000 everything was millennium themed? Well, Al-Qaeda wanted to get on that too, as terrorism is 1 part violence, 2 parts PR. They tried several plots such as bombing 4 cities in Lebanon, as well as the USS the Sullivans. They tried hijacking an Indian Airlines flight, and they wanted to set off a bomb in the Los Angeles airport. In 2000, Al-Qaeda bombed a naval destroyer called the USS Cole while it refueled in Yemen. 17 sailors died and 39 more were injured. They used a boat filled with explosives to take a big chunk out of the side of the ship. We can see here, Al-Qaeda is getting more ambitious and more successful with every operation. PayPal.me/stepbackhistory. So I know Patreon can sometimes be a commitment you don't want or can't make. If you still want to support Step Back but don't want the commitment, or just want to give a tip for a particular video you liked, you could do so here. Just click the link in the description. Now, back to the show. Quick aside, I imagine you might ask about the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. Often, Al-Qaeda is blamed for it, but while an Al-Qaeda operative did the deed, it wasn't an official Al-Qaeda operation. It seems the admirations of dictators can sometimes be mercurial. Reportedly, throughout the 90s, the Sudanese government offered to arrest bin Laden for the Americans, but they didn't bite. Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda became less and less welcome in Sudan. In May of 1996, the Sudanese government told them they had to leave. While all this was occurring in the 90s, Afghanistan finally settled on a new governing party. A group called the Students, or in the Pashto language, the Taliban, took power. Many of the Taliban leaders were bin Laden's friends from the Soviet-Afghan War, and they became prominent by setting up radical Salafi schools and bringing in war orphans. Bin Laden still funneled money to them using unscrupulous charities, or by sending briefcases filled with money into the country through Pakistan. Al-Qaeda had another big moving day and settled in Afghanistan. They moved headquarters and even became a semi-legitimate part of the Taliban's Ministry of Defense. Here, Al-Qaeda was safe, isolated, and protected by a real state. They continued their attacks with reckless abandon after 1996, including some of the attacks I mentioned earlier. However, there was a bigger plan cooking in the late 90s. Al-Qaeda operatives worked on their biggest operation yet, something which would land them in the history books forever and define the 21st century. And the story of that attack will be the next part of this series. If you like this video, I should let you know it's part 2 of a 4-part series. You can click here to see the first episode, and be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification button to ensure you see the next 2 as soon as they come out. I want to thank 12 Tone for the Step Back theme song, as well as a special thanks to all the fantastic patrons who made this video possible. I especially want to thank Don and Carrie Johnson, Colbine Mani, Garrett Kwan, Michael Kirshner, Scott Smith, and James McNeese. Also, shout out to Ben, who found me at a rally in Toronto last week. It was a joy to meet you. Come back next time for more Step Back.